Good morning, Rachel. Thank you for being with us this morning. I'm excited about the launch of this book, and I want to talk to you about the parallels because many people see Spiro Agnew as I said, Trump before Trump. You write in your book, in fact, quote, his default setting was attack mode. He cheerfully derided liberals, the establishment, ivory tower professors, and the press. It wasn't that he was proselytizing for his own cause or for pet policy ideas. Instead, he made a marquee act out of just taking a flamethrower to the other side. So, Rachel, the similarities are easy to see between Agnew and Trump. I'm wondering what you discovered really to be the differences between the two men.
Well, Agnew got run out of Washington on a rail. Instead of just getting voted out of office, he got a second term. It's funny, Ali, seeing those clips, seeing John Chancellor talking about that, seeing Nixon in that era, it really does seem like such a more genteel time. And Agnew was sort of a much more eloquent and articulate version of Trump, I would say. No, not to cast aspersions on our current president, but, Agnew used long words and long sentences with commas in them. And the feel of it is so different, but the impact of Agnew was the same. I mean, he was a raging anti-Semite. He was the most adept player of the race card in Republican politics at the time, short of Pat Buchanan. He was somebody who had no policy goals associated with him really at all. What he did was just tell Americans to hate the press, to hate the other side, to degrade them and to think of them as incapable of holding power, people who should be destroyed rather than abided. And in that way, like he really did sort of pave the way for the kind of Trump politics that we're living through now. That's part of the drama. The other part of the drama is him getting caught and what the Justice Department decided to do about it, which was absolutely every step they took was unprecedented, and they had to make value judgments and strategic judgments every step of the way. Yep. And it was a lot of hard calls.
So let's talk about how that all went down. When prosecutors from Maryland went to the Attorney General and told him about the information they had against Agnew, the Attorney General, Elliot Richardson, said that, quote, the allegations must be fully investigated. That was his quote. This is the Attorney General appointed by President Nixon, and that was his policy, which was, as you write, quote, nobody above the law squared. Now, compare that to the current Attorney General, Bill Barr, and the Department of Justice. Poor Bill Barr, by the way, might be on the outs himself after carrying every bucket of water Donald Trump gave him to carry.
Yeah. And, Richardson, it's amazing, was only in the Office of Attorney General for 5 months. 10 days after he arranged for Spiro Agnew to leave the vice presidency, to resign the vice presidency and thereby save himself a prison term. It's only 10 days after that Nixon did the Saturday Night Massacre and forced Richardson out because Richardson wouldn't fire the Watergate prosecutor. I mean, in much the same ways that the president now demands that the attorney general do his bidding. Nixon was absolutely incensed that Richardson wouldn't just follow him and do exactly what he wanted, no matter how corrupt. But Richardson was absolutely incorruptible. And he did fight with his prosecutors, and they were worried that Agnew should go to jail and that resigning shouldn't be enough. And they fought incredibly hard with Agnew's lawyers about whether or not Agnew could, in fact, be indicted if he was still a sitting vice president, if he didn't resign. One of the I think very sort of newsworthy things that came out of the research for the podcast and the book is that it really does seem like this whole idea that a sitting president can't be indicted sort of came out of the Agnew case. Came out of a bunch of memos and a bunch of fighting between Nixon and Agnew and maneuvering by the two of them that led to strange and not very powerful Justice Department opinions about who can be indicted and who should be impeached instead. That's the basis for Robert Mueller, for example, concluding that Trump couldn't be indicted. He couldn't be charged, and therefore Mueller shouldn't lay out his crimes as crimes. But that was born out of this weird thing with Agnew and Nixon trying to force him out and the Justice Department trying to force him out so that Agnew didn't get elevated to the presidency when Nixon was forced out for being a criminal. I mean, it was just a disaster.
And when Mueller made that decision, he based it on a memo that had been issued by the Office of Legal Counsel. There was a similar memo in your book. The Office of Legal Counsel at the time released a memo prior to Agnew's resignation that basically said that his role was that of a cabinet-level position and that it didn't rise to the same level of the president, and thus he could be indicted while in office, referring to Agnew. It even pointed out that Aaron Burr had been indicted of the murder for the murder of Alexander Hamilton while he was vice president. And did that obligate the department? Did that way of looking at things at the time obligate the department to move forward with an indictment, even though in these days we wouldn't move forward with an indictment against Donald Trump?
Yes, and it's really important to point that out, Ali, and exactly the way you did. This whole idea that a president can't be indicted is sort of a carbuncle that grew on the side of the Agnew scandal. The reason that happened is because Nixon's sort of loyalists or officials who believed they needed to kind of serve Nixon at this time were really trying to make the argument that, okay, yeah, it's fine if you want to try to go after the vice president, but the president definitely can't be indicted. The whole argument about whether or not a president is subject to the criminal justice system should reasonably have been settled when the Supreme Court held that Nixon had to hand over the tapes, right? Nixon didn't want to hand over the White House tapes because he felt like his executive privilege and his status as president essentially rendered him immune from that. And the Supreme Court unanimously settled that and said, no, dude, you're an American citizen. You're subject to the same criminal laws and processes as all of us. And that really should have been the binding precedent that emerged out of this crisis that we had with these criminals in the White House in the 70s. But instead, because of Agnew's legal maneuvering, the maneuvering around the Agnew, what would have been a 40-count felony indictment, we ended up with these memos that I believe ended up saving Donald Trump's butt to this day, and keeping him away from any risk of jail time, at least for the next 45 days. That all grew out of this mess with Agnew.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.